Welcome to Macon Memories. This is Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. I'm here today with Professors Ed Showalter and George Lowry on August the 30th, 2011.
Good morning. This is Ed Showalter, and I'm here with George. And George and I have known each other for quite some time. I graduated from Randolph-Macon in 1984, and George started the semester after I graduated. George, why don't you tell us the story of how you came to be at Randolph-Macon?
The summer of 1984, my family had traveled to Richmond to be a part of a wedding of a relative of my wife. I was looking to make a change. I had spent the first half of my life, all of my real working career, in the construction industry, and decided that it was time to make a change. When I sold for Armco Steel in the earlier years, I had taught economics in night school, and so I thought there were two schools in the Richmond area. One was Randolph-Macon and the other was University of Richmond, and I tell the story that I spit in my palm and slapped it, and the biggest bit went north, so I came to Ashland first. And when I walked into campus, I was pointed to the administration building, Peel Hall, and the registrar's office was situated there just off the lobby. And Mary Maxwell, secretary for the registrar, greeted me and asked me if there was something that she could do for me. And I asked, do you have any jobs? And she said, well, what can you do? And I said, well, I've spent my career working in the construction industry, principally in the masonry portion of that industry, and I also have a master's degree in business and have taught some economics classes, and so I have that to bring to the table. And she said, well, we have two jobs. One is the treasurer's office is looking for someone who could be responsible for the maintenance of our masonry structures on the campus. And the second is that we had someone teaching business courses who has just quit. So who would you like to talk to? And I said, well, I think both. So I actually interviewed in both of the areas, and several weeks later I had a phone call after deciding that the academic path would be the one I'd like to take, and had a phone call. Ed Schmidt was the acting chair of the department. There was a search that was going on for a full-time chair at the time, but Ed was authorized to offer me a position. Tom Porter was the acting dean of the college. They were searching for a dean at that time, and I accepted the position to start teaching in the fall term of 1984. It was a one-year teaching position. We were greeted at the welcome back faculty reception. Tom Porter welcomed us and wished us well for the year that we would be here. And I think this begins the 28th year of me being at the college. It was a one-year appointment that's just turned into a long-standing career. That's how I got here.
What was the department like when you got here?
The department was principally occupied by economists. There was another fellow who taught management and marketing. He did that on a half-time basis. He administered the Bassett internship program for the other half, and we had an adjunct member of the faculty who taught accounting courses here for us. Had one person who taught business law, so it was dominated by the economics side of the curriculum.
How has the curriculum changed in the department since you've been here?
Well, probably the biggest change has been an increase in the presence of general business courses. We made a concerted effort to offer a broader set of courses. Part and parcel to that was the decision to increase our presence with regard to accounting programs. We added a minor in accounting and then subsequently added a major in accounting to the department. And we sit, effectively at a place where we have 4 business faculty and 4 economics faculty members that service a very wide number and range of courses.
I know that at some point in your process, one of the provosts suggested that you might want to pursue a PhD. Could you tell us a little bit about that process and how that came about?
It was actually in my first year. Jerry Garris was actually the individual hired to become the dean of the college. He was hired, and he started in the fall of 1984. Mike Harsh was hired to be the chair of the department, and he started in the fall of 1984, so the three of us had a common starting point. And Mike was a very strong supporter of me. He was a good mentor, and he shepherded me through a great deal and understood that I lacked some experience and exposure and was very patient with helping me through the process. And Jerry Garris called me to his office one day and said, you're pretty good at this. The thing is, if you want to continue with a career in academia, you're going to have a PhD. And that was on a Monday. And I was indignant because I had had all this industry experience and had a master's degree in business and felt like I'd shown that I could do the work. And by Friday, I had made application to a PhD program. I started. That was during the spring semester in 1985, and I started the PhD program in the summer of 1985. And 7 years later, in 1992, May of 1992, I graduated with the PhD. And let me add to that Mike Harsh is the chair of the department, and Jerry Garris and many of the other on the faculty and staff at the college were hugely supportive in deferring national searches for the position that I occupied because they believed I was making sufficient progress, and so effectively forestalled a search. I actually moved into a tenure track position upon completion of certain parts of that program, and was granted. As a matter of fact, the evening of my graduation, I was notified that I had been approved for tenure at the college.
Wow, that's wonderful.
We share a little bit of a common history, particularly in the PhD program. You went to VCU, and not long after you graduated from VCU, I started my PhD program at VCU, and my faculty advisor there, Randy Sleeth, had been your faculty advisor, your dissertation advisor, and when I was reaching the dissertation stage, I asked what a dissertation was supposed to look like, and he handed me yours and said, "This is what a dissertation is supposed to look like." It was also an interesting point about that time when I had published a little paper for Southeastern Decision Sciences Institute, SEDSI, and Randy and I went down to Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's when I first met you. And as I recall, the first words out of my mouth were, "I want your job."
That's right. I remember it vividly. We were in the grand ballroom, was one of the presentation rooms. That's exactly what you said.
So what was your job like at that point?
Well, prior to completion of the degree, I was very, very active. I chaired Resources and Plans Committee. I had served on the College Life Committee, which at that time was not a standing committee. I was very active in the life of the college and taught a full-time load, and VCU's program was in transition. I was fortunate at the timing because I was able to take on as few as 2 courses a term down there in order to make steady progress. They made a few changes, and you had to have a residency requirement, which meant that you had to be enrolled in no less than 3 courses for 2 terms, and so it made for a dicey time for trying to get all the work done. But again, as I say, the college was hugely supportive of me to be able to get that done and the department was too, in the sense that everyone was in different stages of their life with the growth and development of their own families, and we were able to set up teaching schedules in such a way that I could align my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays to teach and have my Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to prep for my own teaching classes, but also to prep for my PhD classes. We were a very cooperative department. We still are. It's amazing when we go to conferences and hear the rancor that exists among faculty within departments or even within subdisciplines, and we have a tremendous amount of rapport and support for each other. The college was very active at the time. We faced, in the latter years of my work on that program in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a decrease in enrollments of the college. I sat on the President's Cost Management Committee. We were looking for ways in which we could try to, keep the college going during that time. So very tumultuous time, but also one that was very rewarding. There were some interesting people. One story that I'll share is I remember vividly when I was going up for tenure that the process is you complete all the paperwork and you have your binder and you have all the things that you've accomplished and you submit all that and it's reviewed. And then the scariest part of the whole process is that you have this pre-tenure interview and you meet with the Board of Trustees for that, the Academic Affairs Committee of the Board of Trustees. And our session was scheduled for a small conference room in the Crenshaw Gym building on the second floor there. And I remember going in you sat outside and you waited until you were called in. And so here, are all these, very high-powered people who are sitting there, and your belief is that they're going to sit in judgment of whether you're going to get the thumbs up or thumbs down, sort of Coliseum style. And I walked in, and I guess I looked a little bit nervous. And Brian Lamb, the founder of C-SPAN, was on our Board of Trustees at the time. Brian, who I had met, I'd had him here, regressing just a minute here, I ran the executive speaker program for the President's Office, where we invited in top CEOs from all over the country, and it was my job to coordinate all of the logistics, classroom visits, luncheons, all of that sort of thing. Well, Brian knew me from his experience having been on the campus. So when I started through the door, Brian jumped up from the table and walked across the room, shook my hand, and led me across and sat me down at the foot of the table. Ira Lechner was the chair of the committee at the time. Well, I knew Ira because Ira had been a part of that executive speaker program. Well, Brian and Ira led the conversation through the whole thing. So those were my friendly faces that were in the crowd. And when it was all over and done with, I stood up and got ready to leave, and Brian came over and got me and guided me around the table to make sure that I had shaken everyone's hand, to make sure that I'd done all that I needed to do, that I was supposed to do. It was just one of those magic moments of, really being mentored along by someone who was an insider but really an outsider. It's an amazing experience. When I see Brian on television, I remember that as a highlight of a time here at the college.
Who were some of your mentors and role models, perhaps outside the department as well as inside the department in those the early years?
In the early years. Well, you have to set the stage because the campus looks very different now. The departments and programs are spread all over the geography of the campus. When I arrived, the political science and philosophy departments occupied the offices on the first floor of Fox Hall. Economics and business and history occupied the offices on the second floor of Fox, and the offices were subdivided into much, much smaller spaces than what you see today. And so I guess the two key people who helped me the greatest in those early days were George Oliver and James Scanlon. James's office was effectively one door away from me on one side of the hall, and George Oliver was one door away from me on the other side. And so if I had questions or concerns, part of it, I guess, is ego. You don't want to admit to your departmental colleagues that you don't know which way is up. And so I could talk with them, and James and George both had been through this. They'd been through it themselves as young faculty in their prior years, but also they had helped to shepherd people through, and they were just incredibly supportive and helpful. And how do you make up tests, or what goes into a syllabus, or how do I deal with this particular problem with this particular student, and the general culture of the campus and dealing with administrative issues and all that was their key role, and they took to it and did a very good job. We still remain very, very good friends. George is retired and away from the college. James is all but retired and away from the college. But when we see each other, we pick up as if we'd never missed a beat.
You mentioned that the faculty was much more centralized, and a lot of departments were located in certain buildings. How would you say over the last 27 years, faculty interaction has changed as a result of some of these structural changes that have happened?
I think in some ways the faculty's become somewhat polarized. It's a lot easier to understand your colleagues' perspective when you see them coming in the door and going out the door every day. You know, when you brew up a pot of coffee and they come down with their mug and they want some, you get a chance to just chat about stuff, whether it's about the college or just everyday life. And I think it's easy to demonize others when you don't spend time with them. Your perspective is altered considerably as a result. So with faculty offices that are scattered across the railroad tracks, and there's nothing wrong with utilizing those spaces, except that it's difficult. It's almost a little bit surreal to try to create activities that will force faculty to come together in ways that just aren't the same organic and natural feel as when you're sharing space with them. One of the things that I've enjoyed tremendously about our department is that, except for a very short period of time, we have all occupied the same portion of the same buildings. There was a time in transition when we moved from Fox that some moved over to a portion of Thomas Branch, which was renovated for that purpose. Then we all finally came back together again, and there was a genuine sense of unity when we all got together again. Then when we moved from there over to, I guess, the Taylor Street house, you know, here we are in a house that was slightly off level. You could put a pen on a table and the pen would roll off the edge, and everyone kind of leaned sideways when they said the name Taylor Street house. And then, you know, for us, we were bounced around a little bit, but finding our home in the Raglan Henry house, we still have that same sense of unity. And maybe it's just going through the bumps of you know, all the years together that's really helped that, and living in all these different spaces. But I think we've lost something in the sense that we've spread ourselves out, and so this department's in this building and that department's in that building, and so on and so forth. Just in terms of office space, I think it causes some friction.
I know that one of your committees that you were on was the Early Technology Task Force that was supposed to bring technology onto campus. Of course, during the 80s was the rise of the personal computer and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen technology change on campus, and talk a little bit both about the sort of structural part of that, but what have been sort of the behavioral changes that may have resulted as your perspective has changed on, or our perspective has changed on technology?
It's interesting. When I came onto the campus in 1984, there was a program that might have been in place for a year, maybe slightly longer, but for a year. And the program was a way in which the college would help to underwrite the financing costs of faculty who wanted to purchase computers. And there were two platforms that were supported effectively. One was a CPM platform, and so people bought these computers called K-Pros. And anybody who listens to this will laugh when they hear that, because they remember the old K-Pro computers. And then the other was an MS-DOS operating system. Those were, there were a whole variety of vendors who were out there at the time who were selling machines that could run that. I can't remember the exact details of what the support was, other than the fact that you could make a purchase through the college, and the college then would deduct a portion of money from your paycheck periodically until you had paid that off. And it was some very small amount, and it was a very generous offer. The interesting aspect was that I remember I opted for the MS-DOS machine, and I bought a Tandy computer, and it had a hard disk drive on it. And I think I was one of two people on the campus that had a hard disk drive. And they said I think it held 10 megs. I think it had 10 megs of storage space on it. And people just shook their heads and said, you will never fill that up. You will never fill that up. But I think if I remember correctly, you could get this computer, and it had the monitor was not a green screen. It had the amber-colored characters on it. And you could get a dot matrix printer, which you felt like you'd died and gone to heaven, because you could press print and you could go away and come back and it would print. And it wouldn't, the only errors would be there were the ones that you put into it in the first place. It wasn't typing errors, so to speak, because your fingers slipped or something. And I think it was $2,500. That's got you that level of technology, which was just light years beyond, the IBM Selectric with a correction tape on it. It was just huge, absolutely huge. The college, I say that anecdotally because when you think about the early part of the 1980s, that was a true turning point for microcomputing. The cost of purchasing the equipment, the level of sophistication of the software was just enough to cause people to say, okay, we got to move into this. And the college was really behind that notion in terms of the support that they gave to the faculty members. I can remember in classes that I would give extra credit to students if they would produce their term papers on a computer instead of having them actually typed. And that would be an encouragement for that. And I worked with John Raboon, who was deeply engaged in the computer science department, deeply engaged in this concept, and a computer literacy requirement was developed on the campus. And the idea was that if you could put a designation onto a course, the /C as computer intensive, and if faculty could write ways to incorporate the use of the computer into their classes, that at some point you wouldn't need that /C designation because it would just be integrated in everything that you did. So I sat on the Computer Literacy Council. I helped to coordinate a program that actually came out of D.C. called Teaching, Learning, and Technology Conferences, TLTC, that I helped coordinate through the VFIC to get that level of technology education transmitted to the VFIC schools, ours included. As served on the Computer Literacy Council, as I say, and then was successful in helping to co-write and then to co-direct grants that could provide ongoing education to the faculty and to staff about the use of the computing technologies and ways in which they could incorporate that into their regular routines. So pretty much engaged in that. And there's been, fits and starts with it in the sense that students would come in and they might have a higher level of technical skill but not the application skills. And then might be that they had higher levels of application skills but not the technical skills. So it's always the case where we've been chasing in circles as to, who's on first in a sense as to what we needed to do with it. But it's been a tremendous change. We had computer labs that were put on campus. I will say one of the strongest supporters of it was Mike Harsh, the chair of the department. He put forth some real efforts and helped to raise some funds. Our department had one of the first computer labs on the campus that we had dedicated a classroom to and changed the orientation in a classroom and set up the computers in there so that the students could use those. And it predated the use of email. I think Pine was the first of the sort of generally accepted email packages, which were so cumbersome to operate with. But so it's been an interesting evolution. We have computer labs on the campus now that students use, and of course, they've got their laptops or netbooks or whatever else that they work with, smartphones now, and all the rest of it. So it's been an interesting thing to trace. I haven't been actively involved in the technology aspects of the college for a number of years, but as a teacher, it's been an interesting piece.
Has it changed how students interact and contact you?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that students used to come around to the office during office hours or not, and now they just send you an email. If they have a question, they'll send you an email. If it gets convoluted, then you spend too much time trying to figure out when you're going to be able to schedule an appointment that they can meet because their schedules are so busy as well. It has changed. It has changed the dynamic. I will say, on the other hand, in the classes, having access to Moodle is absolutely fantastic. We can post up slides for lecture notes that we can access from anywhere if we want to make changes in those. We can post up assignments. We can post up grades. We can post up readings. We can have feeds from outside sources that students can get to. In a lot of ways, it has been tremendously beneficial. I think part of the problems that we face as teachers is we've forgotten the idea of how to build lesson plans. And Moodle has helped us to come back around to the idea that here's the instantiation of a lesson plan, even if it's happening on a real-time basis. Oh, here's a reading I'm posting up for class for this week. It didn't necessarily get posted up 3 weeks ago for this week, but here's now a documented history of what's gone on in the class, and the fact that we can save that and bring it up and modify it for a subsequent term or use it as a model for other classes, I think forces us back into a much more proactive approach in terms of planning what we do in our classes, rather than it being quite so ad hoc as it might have been in some cases.
While we're on the subject of students, I know that two of the students that have graduated from here have had the last name Lowry. Want to tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a parent of a student on campus? How do you handle that as a faculty member?
My elder daughter, Catherine, had grown up, in a sense, on this campus, coming up from time to time. And when it came time to apply to school, of course, Randolph-Macon was a place she wasn't going to go. And so she had decided she was going to go to the University of Richmond, was accepted there. And, it was, I don't know, the first break of nice warm weather in the spring before of her senior year in high school. And she left the house for a bit. She came back a little bit later, and she said, "I've decided I'm not going to the University of Richmond." "Why not?" "Well, because it's just too big. I just don't feel like I'll have an identity there." "So where are you going?" She said, "Well, I'll go to Randolph-Macon." I said, "Don't you think you should turn in an application?" So she did, in fact, apply to the college and was accepted to the college. And our decision was that for any of our children, she was the first to go, but for any of the children, they needed to have the on-campus experience. They needed to live on campus and have all that had to offer, good and bad. And I made no overt attempts to tell anyone on the campus that she was here, and equally she didn't either. And I think the greatest piece of praise with regard to that was that at the convocation that occurred in the spring of her senior year, she was identified and received an award as the outstanding psychology student on the campus. And the faculty sitting around me in the audience where the faculty were sitting turned around and said, "Is that your daughter?" And it was, I mean, after 4 years, they didn't know that she was a part of my family, which I thought was good. It allowed her to have her own independence. She chose a path to be very active in the theater, working with Joe Mattis and the rest of them. She just really enjoyed that a great deal. She was active in the psychology department. She was successful in writing a proposal for a surf project the summer prior to her senior year, and that really switched her on. And I do have to give a tremendous amount of thanks to Kelly Lambert for supporting her in what she did. I think that work, in addition to her own performance here at the college, paved the way. She ended up going to the University of Chicago and earned her Ph.D. in neuroscience and as a neurobiologist, and is very good at what she does. My second daughter, there was never a question in her mind that she was going to Randolph-Macon College. She didn't apply anywhere else. She applied for early decision. I remember that we had to, scrub fingerprints off the ceiling from her jumping up and down when they called her and told her she'd been accepted. Well, she got her letter, I guess, and then they followed up with a phone call. She similarly lived on campus and exacted, I guess, as much as any one person pretty much could in terms of programming at the college. She participated in a semester abroad at Roxton College, our sister organization there. She did a semester with the Walt Disney College program that we have worked with in the past, and was active in the social life of the college. Graduated, and she definitely bleeds lemon and black. There's no question about it. Willing to help out at any time. She actually worked on the campus in the alumni office when she was a student here, and she has done follow-up work with them since graduating. So, great experience. And they would pop by the office whenever they felt like it, but otherwise I didn't seek them out. Just, it was a nice relationship.
That Margaret's experience with Walt Disney was part of our internship program. In fact, that was one of the things that, as the director of the internship program, you instituted. But you had, prior to stepping down, before you were re-recruited into the internship program, 13 years as director of the Bassett Internship Program. Tell us a little bit about that program and what it looked like when you took it over and how it's changed over the last 15 years.
To go back a little bit in the history, the program was initiated at a response to an outside consultant with regard to programming in the econ business department. And the notion was that if we could put together a vanguard program within that department, it would help to build the profile of the department. And at that time, in the early part of the 1980s, there weren't any true internship programs that existed outside of the professionals, the CPAs, the law schools. Those were, and of course medicine had formalized internship programs, but nothing really at the undergraduate level. Jim Buckle was my predecessor. He was the faculty member who taught the marketing and management classes for the department when I joined in 1984. Was the director of that program and was actually, the main voice of that program and helping to get it funded by the Bassett family, the furniture company family. And they put together a proposal, and they got some preliminary funding to put the program together. And it was intended initially as the Bassett Management Internship Program. But there was interest in the first year from others within other departments to have students participate, and so a small number did in the first year and an increasing number across other departments in the second year. The results and successes of that program generated another proposal which went back to the Bassetts. They stepped up and provided a sufficient amount of funding to, in a sense, endow the program. And so Jim ran that program until I took it over in, I guess, 1994, I think, is when I took that over. Jim retired from the college in the spring, and I took that over at that time. The program had a good reach. It had done an exceptional job. It was principally focused in the Richmond metro area, and I had some interest in trying to expand the scope of that program. We'd had participation of students who had gone to their hometowns or those of their relatives to do an internship, principally during January term, infrequently during the summer months, and never during a regular semester. And it seemed to me that there were circumstances that suggested that we might want to modify that program. We had several students who had gone overseas. Again, those were a matter of convenience because of connections that those students had made. I saw the international environment as one that we could broach and have some successes in. And so over the following years, I looked for ways that we could expand our exposure on all of those particular fronts. And we had some real successes. The numbers are good, and we have good relationships. Some were, purely by happenstance. I had one story on that, if I can. I had two young women who were very good friends with each other, and in 1 year they wanted to do internships, and so I was fortunate through an alumni connection to place one in New York City with an advertising agency, and the other one through family friends did an internship in Hong Kong, and through Philip Morris. So they came to me the next year, and being fast friends, they wanted to do something else, and they wanted to go to Switzerland. So I didn't know anybody in Switzerland, so I started making some contacts and discovered that they were fiercely protective of their jobs, even if they're non-paid, as our interns are, and that they wouldn't be successful in securing a visa to be able to do that. So I went back to them and said, okay, that's not going to work. And so one of the young ladies said that they had a relative who lived in Poland. And so I said, where? And we found out that it was in proximity to Warsaw. So I called the Marriott in Poland and talked to the HR director and explained the situation. And she said, well, we'd love to have them come along. We can't provide housing. I said, that's not a problem. They apparently have housing. And she said, and they're not paid? I said, no, they're not paid. She said, well, could they have meals here? Yes, they can have meals. We'll provide their uniforms. I said, that's fine. That won't be a problem. And so off the two girls go. And so it turns out to be one of the planes, trains, and automobiles kinds of experiences, because they got up in the morning and they had to get a car ride to a train station, whereupon they got onto a bus, whereupon they had to trudge through the snow and the ice to get to where they were going for their work every single day. And they said the biggest adjustment that they had to make was learning to drink vodka at breakfast, because that was just the thing that was done when they sat down at the breakfast table. It wasn't morning coffee, it was morning vodka. It was about half the strength of what we would think about in the States, but they had to get to that. So I get a phone call the second day from the HR director who said, I'd like to change their assignment. She was going to put them on the concierge desk because they had a tremendous international traffic through the hotel there in Warsaw. And she said, what we've decided to do, if this is all right with you, is that we want to pull these two off and have them help us with service delivery and service recovery training for our employees. That Americans know how to deal with complaints, and we're going to set them up, and we're going to script them with the kinds of questions and complaints that we get and field those kinds of questions from our workers, and we're going to put them in the training. They spent the rest of their internship training them on American-style service delivery, service recovery. So it was one of those that started in one direction and ended up in another, but incredibly successful. And that's an example. I guess I'm offering that as an example as to how we were able to reach out and set up internships. The same kinds of things happen with locations in the United States. Somebody said, I think I want to go here. I was telling someone this morning that somebody wanted to go stay with family in Charleston, South Carolina. I ended up hooking them up with a Spoleto Festival, and they worked in January to help get things set up for the springtime Spoleto Festival. And there were circumstances where I had a young man who came from Budapest. His mother worked at the World Bank. And so we were able to make a connection there, principally through her connections, to get things set up. So it wasn't always my efforts that resulted in that. It was often the students who were able to help out with that. But it gave us a very, very broad reach in terms of what we've been able to do. And at the core, it's not so much about the number of countries or the number of states or the number of sites. It's more that this is something that the student thought they wanted to do, and we made every effort that we could across all of our offices on the campus to see if we couldn't make that happen for them.
I know another area that has been near and dear to your heart has been international travel. You have led, I'm not sure how many times, but well over 10 or 15 trips to England, particularly to Roxton. Tell us a little bit about how that has impacted you and impacted the students. I know it led to one extended stay for a sabbatical. You enjoy your trips to England. Tell us a little bit about how that's changed over the years. How you got into that?
I think it was 1981 that my colleague Barry Fitzner realized that there were study abroad locations the college had affiliated itself with that had surplus space during our January term. They didn't start until later in January. And Roxton College was a relatively new partner for us at the time. So in 81 and 82, he arranged to take students to Roxton, where they would live in residence at Roxton College, and programming was set up by the director there, the provost there. 93, I think, was the first year that I joined him in taking students. The numbers were increasing, the number of students were increasing, and it dictated that we have more than one faculty member who would go along. I think it was actually that first year, perhaps it was 94, I'm a little fuzzy on that we actually offered 2 courses so students could enroll in as many as 6 hours for that. The notion would be that we could provide some background core information with regard to the discipline we were studying. For me, it was international finance. For him, it was international trade theory. And we would take the students then maybe the middle of the second week and be there for roughly 2 weeks, 2 weeks and a day or something like that, be housed at Roxton, but would have the opportunity to see some of the historic sites that were there, guest lectures that would occur, a visit to the UK Parliament to meet and talk with some of the members of Parliament, either from the House of Commons and or the House of Lords. But to have an exposure that would give them something different than a semester-long experience. Concerns were that we couldn't really support a large number of students on semester abroad, but equally many students were concerned about going overseas. They were just unfamiliar with that. Might have traveled with their parents at a young age, but as young adults might feel uncomfortable with it. It was January of 93 was my first trip, and I was so struck by the conversation occurring in our visits to the Houses of Parliament the conversations about the creation of the single currency with regard to the European Union. And that really, it just hit me so hard as to what was going on that became a research stream for me and really became a focus. You mentioned the number of trips, my number of international trips that involve England with and without students. I think for the trip that you and I have planned for this January of 2012 will, I think, mark the 20th trip that I will have made over the ocean for a variety of reasons. But it definitely set the tone for a research agenda for me in studying the creation of the European Union, not just the single currency or the financial impact, but also the political and economic conditions that support that. Such that in 2002, you and I did, in fact, take students over for January, and I remember standing in the forecourt waving at the bus as it drove off to the airport, and I turned around and walked back upstairs and got back in bed, and I stayed there until July of that year. So nearly 7 months that I lived there and met a number of business leaders, policymakers, government leaders, both in the UK but also on the continent in the member nations. Traveled to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and met with leaders there as well, and really shaped a worldview of mine that's very, very different than it was prior to that time. I think one of the highlights of being in this line of work is that in as much as we never know what our life course is going to be, you never know what your research course is going to be. It can change at any moment.
What would you say were some of the watershed events that you've seen at Randolph-Macon over the last 28 years? I think
there are minor ripples that occur. I think the change of administrators. I think in my time here, counting the interims, there have been 6 deans/provosts of college. There have been 3 presidents of the college. I think there have been changes in leadership at the departmental level. There have been changes in focus in terms of programming, this strategic plan, that strategic plan. Those are sort of minor ripples and what you would expect to occur just as a natural evolution in any organization. There are 2 that really stick out in my mind as big events that had a tremendous impact on, I think, the way everyone on the campus looked at their lives. The first was when the Challenger blew up. I remember vividly stepping into George Oliver's office. We were still occupying the second floor of Fox, jointly, and he had rapped on the wall, actually, and I came around, and he'd just shown me the first rebroadcast of that. I think it really shook the foundation of everyone, but on this campus, here was what was viewed to be this nearly flawless program, and here was something that had happened that just really said, no, it's not as deterministic as we think it is. The second would have to be the September 11th attacks. I remember walking into the first floor of Fox Hall, and Lauren Bell and some of the others on the first floor in political science were, sitting with their students, and they were staring at the screen on the front of the room, which was not in view from somebody walking down the hall. And I remember, thinking something flippant about the fact that they must be watching cartoons or something, only to step inside and see that one of the buildings was engulfed in flames. The second plane hadn't even struck at that time. And the impact that had on the campus was amazing. In terms of the outpouring of support for anyone who was directly affected with that, but also just the indirect impact that had. I remember we pulled everyone together into Blackwell, and here was the chaplain offered prayers, but there were also just words of support that came from the administration. Not oh, well, we're here if you need us. It's really talking about how we could cope and deal with this. It's funny that you asked this question, and for me to think about this as a big event. Periodically, we all have to go through and clean up our file cabinets and shelves and all that sort of thing. And there's an envelope that sits on my shelf, which I've seen several times. But I remember having gone to my international finance class the morning of the attacks And of course, it would have been ridiculous to try to, teach, purchasing power parity or something like that. So I had them write their response and their feeling to all of that, and I actually have those. And I have thought, that each of the anniversaries I should, and I just have never done it, but to pull those out and to photocopy them and get with the alumni office and mail them a copy so that they could see what their reactions were on that day. I don't ever intend to get rid of them, whether it's a copy for me or the original. It's amazing to go through and to read about that. I think those were huge impacts to our campus.
Of course, I remember that time vividly. That was my, in fact, second week on the faculty that happened, which was so it was quite an introduction to campus life and to watch campus life change. A lot of things have changed in that period of time, and we've worked together on several things. One of the things that I think we're proudest of, and of course, I'll take this opportunity to say that you've been one of my role models and mentors, and thank you for that. Certainly guided me through figuring out the ropes to jump and the ropes to skip and the ropes to know in the department. Helped me through the tenure process and roped me into the internship program, so on and so forth. Which I say with a big smile on my face. I very much enjoy the internship program. But I think one of the things that we're probably proudest of has been how we've changed the teaching model in the Principles of Management class. Why don't we talk a little bit about what we've done there, because I think that's a real change in not just how we teach it, but how the students approach the concepts of management.
I think you're right. I would have to say that, the accomplishments across the years, what we've done with the management class has been a prototype for changes that I have made in virtually all of my courses. I've always felt like, and I know you share this too, that students need to be engaged in what they're doing. They have to take ownership in it. And the way that they do that is that we have to stop being teachers and more facilitators. We are not the source of all information. We need to get them inspired to take the ownership in their own education. And that's the only way it's really going to work. The aha moment for me was my sabbatical leave when I was in England. The teaching method that's used across most of university level education in Britain dates back over 400 years. It's called the tutorial method. And there is no single approach. It's virtually every person who operates under that model has their own stylized approach. It can range anywhere from the class meets the first day and students only meet with their faculty members if they have any questions. They never have a class through the whole of the term. They have a reading list. They have a set of what are called tutorial questions, and they are expected to research and write answers to each of those questions in preparation to sit their final exam at the end of the term. And their level of preparation either assures or defeats their ability to be able to pass the course. There are others which are much more interactive, and that's the model that we've accepted into our teaching approach, and that is we can set the tutorial questions to them, and then they are required to prepare a written report, but also notes from which they can orally defend their position. So we go back to the rhetoric, I guess, in a way, old school kind of approach in terms of what we do in management. So we have combined in a single semester a course which we have tremendous amount of experience teaching. In my early years at the college, I would teach as many as 3 sections of the course back to back to back, and the next term teach it 2 times back to back. So I would teach the same course 5 times, and frankly, you and I both admitted we were getting tired of it. It's just the same story over and over again. It's just not particularly efficient. because you don't remember what you might have said to someone else, no matter how good your notes are. And also, the jokes get stale after you get tired of telling them, much less the students hearing them. So the notion was that we could combine 2 sections in any given term, and we would team teach the class. The structure would be that we would have some elements that are lecture, which lecture is a loose term. We go in and have a conversation with the students. We have slides put together, their talking points, and we both end up telling stories, and oftentimes instead of just hitting every single bullet point. We have seminars, which are in-class exercises. The students have no idea how they're going to be teamed up, and we give them real-world applications that they have to apply readings for background into solving particular problems in the class. And our mantra is do it again. They'll do a solution and they'll put it up on the board, or they'll do a presentation, or they'll build a little model of something, and they'll fall woefully short of the expectations. And we include the students in the evaluation process. We'll just choose them at random and have them go around and evaluate the other team's work, and it's amazing. I mean, they grade them down lower than we would, and so they get the charge to do it again. We've carved out a 2-hour block of time that we meet 2 times a week. They get 3 hours credit for it, so they're always a little confused about that. But the piece that really helps is our tutorial sessions. We run 4 tutorials through the term, and we subdivide the class in such a way that each tutorial group meets with each of us only 2 times. Each group meets with us 1 hour of each of those times, 4 times throughout the term. We set questions to them that are related to the topics that we are covering in the course, and then they're required to not only take a position, but also support it through outside readings. Historically, we've used Business Week as a common reading, and they look then for real-world examples to help to support their particular position, but they're scared to death of it. It defies true definition until you can actually get into it and do it yourself. No matter how much you or I would explain it, people would still not understand it until they actually had to do it. But it really does bring them to a place where they are taking ownership for it. They don't come to blows, but they really do get to the place from time to time that they're really instanced in their particular position. And sometimes it's hard to get them to shake that position. But again, that's part of what we want them to do, is to say, okay, well, where are you on this? And that's had a tremendous impact on my philosophy of teaching, is to think about, and there's a model out there that I can actually put a name to. It's called action mapping. And the idea is that you first of all have to think about what you want a student to be able to do. And so for us, we want them to be able to read and understand. We want them to be able to work together in groups. We want them to be able to embrace a particular position by defining their key terms and being able to defend their position. So we need for them to, first of all, what do you want them to do? And then you back up off of that and you say, what skills do they have to have in order to be able to do that? And to have those skills, what knowledge do they have to have? And to get that knowledge, what information do I have to provide to them as the teacher to help them get where they need to be? And in many instances, the old school perspective on education is, I am the purveyor of information. It's up to the students to figure out how to make all that work. What we did with the management class was we said, what do we want them to be able to do? We didn't say it in so many words, but we did that. What skills do they have to have? Writing skills, speaking skills, research skills, cooperative work skills. That's the skills that they had. How did they get there? Well, we had to provide them with environments that got them to the place they could do that. What information do they have to have? Here's a textbook. Here's the lecture. Here's the outside sources. And I think we've done a really good job of that. It's I think, a prototype that has helped me with my other classes to make those classes much more meaningful to the students. I think the other piece which has been good out of this is that recognizing early on what are the pitfalls of team teaching. Where do you run into problems? You've got 2 people standing up there. Who's in charge? Who's going to take care of my grade? Who's administering what's going on? All of those things. And Ed, to your credit, you did the background research to say, look, here are the identified failings of team teaching. And what we did was we worked as hard as we could to say, okay, what's the solution to that? And so it's fun because I'm going to teach a first-year experience course this year for the first time. And for my partner, I said, we have got to figure out who's on first. And what we do is we say, okay, you have the primary instructor, right, and you have secondary instructor. And the primary instructor is ultimately responsible for the course. So for management this fall, I'm the PI, Ed's SI. And similarly for the FYC that I'm doing, because I'm team teaching that class with someone who we spoke about earlier, she's going to be the SI. And when we get to spring term, Ed becomes PI and I'm SI, she'll be PI and I'll be SI in that regard. And that takes care of a lot of the problems that we found in the literature with regard to team teaching. On the FYC, I do get a rare distinction in that my partner in teaching the FYC is my daughter Catherine, the neurobiologist. So that'll be a lot of fun. We're anxious and excited. We're breaking all kinds of rules because we're teaching the class as a night class on Wednesday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. and we've said there's no way we're splitting up the group, so we're going to both be present each night, and we'll have all 36 students in the room at the same time, and we have all kinds of exercises. We'll break out and go to the bio lab, and they're going to dissect some brains, and we're going to do stuff on the computer in terms of mathematical modeling, and we're just going to do all kinds of crazy things to get to why people make dumb decisions.
Of course, 2011 has sort of been a watershed year for you, in that there were two things that you didn't think were ever going to happen. One of which was that you were never going to teach an FYC, which I've heard ever since we instituted the FYC, and the other was you didn't think you were ever going to receive the Thomas Branch Award for teaching, which you received this spring. Congratulations again on that.
Thank you. I'm humbled by that, I must admit.
Just one thing I want to add about our management class. I think that the work that we've done on that, the real proof is in the pudding, and the students' abilities in the upper level classes has perceptibly changed. Their engagement in experiential learning and their engagement in being able to read, to critique, to analyze, to argue has really improved as a result of that. It's also been interesting to watch semester after semester how the students all hate the tutorial process at the first tutorial, and by the end of the semester it's one of their favorite parts of the class. Not necessarily writing up the tutorial papers, but the tutorial sessions. They are quite fearful in the first one and usually raring to go by the time they reach the fourth one. And it's made them much more interactive in the upper level classes, at least in my experience.
May I interject something?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, I think the way you handled the research and application on the management class was a perfect model for your students of how to approach the management problems. I mean, you were modeling how to solve a management problem by the way you handled the class, which was great. I hope you let them know that some of that went into it. The other thing, while we just had a minute, I wanted to make sure that I did get a perspective of Ed of being you may not want to talk about this, but I would like for you to talk a little bit about being an RMC alum who comes back to teach, and make sure you have a chance to talk about that perspective, which is not unique on campus, but becoming more and more rare to have alumni as faculty. So just at some point, I would like you to mention that.
Sure. It's been an interesting experience coming back as a faculty member. I mentioned things that George said he didn't think would ever happen. When I was a senior, there were two things I said I would never do. One of which was go into my family insurance business. I had no intention whatsoever of working with my father, and the other was go to graduate school. The week after graduation, I got married, and to my college sweetheart, and we'd been dating since the second week of our freshman year. And we got married, and I didn't have a job. And I went to work in a bicycle shop, selling bicycles for a while, and basically got tired of eating tuna fish. It didn't pay very well. So I went to my father, having now had some sales experience, and I said, well, I said I would never do this, but I think that I'd kind of like to learn the insurance business. And he had a fairly small insurance agency at the time, and he said no. Then about a month later, he decided that he was going to automate the agency. And again, this goes back to these changes in technology that we've seen. And in those days, the insurance agency books were books. I mean, just several different manuals with 7-part NCR forms, and you'd write down the invoice, and it would go in seven different books, and so on and so forth. But my dad had absolutely no computer experience whatsoever, and neither did anyone else in the insurance agency. In fact, the need was there to have someone with some computer experience. So he came back to me and said, well, I've rethought this, and if you're interested in coming in and handling the computer side of this, we'll find a place for you in the insurance agency. So I really learned the insurance business backwards. I had been one course shy of a computer science minor while I was at Randolph-Macon, and what that really did for me was make me not afraid of the machines. I had some idea about coding and so on and so forth. So I went to work for the insurance agency, and at that point in time, we bought a 2-user microcomputer, a mini computer actually, and with a dot matrix printer, and a huge 4-megabyte hard drive, 9-inch floppy disks, and this thing cost something in the neighborhood of about $25,000, which in January of 1985 was a huge investment for a small insurance business. But and it was a 3-person shop when I joined it. It became a 4-person shop. Well, I had to learn anything and everything there was about the insurance business, and I started by working on how you code in policy forms. And so as I was learning how to code this into the computer, I was also taking the classes on what all these policy forms meant, and so on and so forth. And I got my life and health license, and then I got my property and casualty license. And then after we had coded in most of the clients, we started working on transforming the accounting system over. And so I learned all there was about accounting by having to transfer an accounting system. And things worked out pretty well, and the computer system began to pay off, and I sold a little insurance and learned a lot about running the business. And when I was about 25, my dad was 65 and decided that it was about time for him to retire, and he asked me if I would like to take over the insurance business. And I said yes. And he said, well, there's one caveat. You probably need to know something about running a business besides just the experience here, so I think that you ought to go back and get your MBA. So there was the second thing I said I would never do. I went back and I started the MBA program, ended up loving the academics of business, finished the MBA program after about 3.5 years. My undergraduate here was political science, so I had to take essentially the equivalent of an undergraduate and a graduate program in business. But I fell in love with the academics of business, went back to the insurance agency for 2 or 3 years, and then decided that what I really wanted to do was teach. So it was a long time before I ended up looking back into teaching. I taught at 2 other places before an opportunity came to come to Randolph-Macon, but I had met George at a conference, and through our through our contacts at VCU, and so I contacted George and made an application and came to Randolph-Macon. And delighted to be here, but a little bit. It was a little strange because physically the campus hadn't changed very much. We hadn't built any new buildings other than the Brock Center. So all the dormitories were in the same place. All of the academic buildings were in the same place. There was a little bit more computer technology in the academic buildings that had been there before. But I was teaching in Fox Hall, where I had taken all my political science courses. One of the first things that happened at faculty orientation was we had our luncheon, and James Scanlon always gave a history of the college to incoming faculty. And I knew a fair amount about the history of the college, but we sat down for lunch, and my place happened to be next to James Scanlon. And I sat down and I said, "Hello, Dr. Scanlon, how are you?" And he said, "Call me James." And I said, "No, I can't do that." It took me a few years before I could call James Scanlon James, and I think the last of the faculty members was that I was able to use, but my first name was Bruce Unger, because he'd been my advisor and my primary faculty member while I was here, and it took me a long time before I could call Bruce Bruce. But I think that one of the benefits for me coming back was that I didn't come back to the same department that I had graduated from. I think it would have been much more difficult to have actually had my professors be my colleagues. Having not been an economics and business major, I knew of some of the folks in economics and business, but had never had them as faculty members. I had met Barry Fitzner, I'd met Ed Schmidt, I'd met Ed Woodward, but I didn't know them as a student. So fortunately, they didn't know my flaws, and they were able to. I was able to treat them very early on as colleagues rather than as former faculty. It's been an interesting experience. One of the things that's really changed, I think, is student life. When I was here, our student services or student life was essentially Ira Andrews, Catherine Hall, and their secretary, and that was it. And now our student services division has multiple layers and managers and is a much more comprehensive administration. There's a great deal more administration now than there was when I was a student, and that's just reflective of changing times and best practices across all colleges. But it's been a lot of fun. I think now after having gotten tenure and having been here for about 10 years, I think of myself more as a faculty member, and my role here is much more cognitively faculty member rather than former student. Mm-hmm. So that's been a lot of fun. It was interesting that the welcome back luncheon yesterday. We have a new faculty member who's also an alum, mm-hmm. and it was nice to go over and welcome them and be one of the old guard of former student faculty members welcoming in someone new, because I think that's the first one we've hired full time on the faculty since George's daughter Catherine.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we got that on the record. Well, any final thoughts or any way you would like to sum up your time at Randolph-Macon? You're still both extremely active, so it's not, some might not be the right word, but looking back from this point, any final words?
I've thought about it a lot. I had no intention whatever of staying in the academic field. Joining the faculty in 1984 was an opportunity to transition from dependence on the spending agencies in the construction industry to find my footing. Our rationale for moving to Richmond was it put us closer to the beach, a much more energized area, being on the Golden Crescent from D.C. through Richmond down to the Tidewater area. So economic stability was something we expected, and had no idea that it was going to turn out the way it has. It's hard for me to believe that the number of years have passed, that all the things have happened. And I've reflected a little bit on some of the things. I took a look at some of the activities I've been involved with the college over the years, and the list just seems to go on and on in terms of things that I've been involved with, and it just doesn't seem like it's been that long. I look forward to continuing here at the college. I appreciate all of the efforts that have been made on my behalf to make me a part of it. I still have difficulty believing that I am an academic, that I really belong here, having cut my teeth actually in industry. It's hard for me to really come to grips with that, but in a lot of ways I realize that that's really who I am. That's who I've become, I guess, is a better way to think about it. I don't know that I have ever really thought about making a move to leave here, but I can say that if someone were to ask me now, I can think of no reason why I would want to. It's not just comfort with my surroundings, it's that I don't know that I would be able to find a place that does all that this place does for me. And I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this interview process. This has been nice. Thank you very much.